The lemon cake Megan brought was still warm when I found the forged signature tucked behind my son's birthday post. Still, I set the table for two, quiet hands, steady knife, while his caption read, Power Brunch, Fuwata's Legends. As the citrus scent rose, so did the knowing, third year forgotten, but not by her. While my son scrolled past the date, she remembered without being reminded, again. The same knife that sliced her cake signed the documents they thought I'd never touch. That's when I gave the estate to her, because family shows up, even when blood doesn't. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Eleanor Sinclair woke early. The kind of early that made the house feel borrowed. Before the heat of the day rose and before the world remembered to care, a soft, bruised pink light bled through the linen curtains of her kitchen as she laid out 2 teacups. China, the delicate kind with faded blue violets on the rim. She didn't light a candle or play music, just the whistle of the kettle and the hush of her slippers against the tile. It was her birthday. She dressed like it mattered, pale green sweater, the one with pearl buttons she usually saved for holidays, and soft jeans that still fit her like a memory of herself 10 years ago. Her hair was pulled back neatly, not for anyone in particular, just in case someone noticed. The phone on the counter was face down, but she could still feel its silence pressing on her. She turned it over, nothing, no messages. No missed calls, no calendar ping. She blinked, stared a moment longer, then set it aside like it had coughed at her. It was fine. People get busy. Patrick was probably at one of his endless work things. Eric lived online but operated like time zones didn't apply to family. It was still early. Still. Curious, she opened Patrick's Instagram. He'd posted 2 hours ago. A story. Muted video of a sleek brunch setup downtown. Champagne flutes clinking. Laughter. Caption, Power Brunch W Legends. Making moves. Eleanor didn't recognize anyone at the table. Eric, her youngest, had posted a gym selfie in the locker room mirror. Shirtless. Caption, Beast Mode, Birthday Pump, Birthday. He wasn't talking about hers. She placed the phone face down again. Eleanor took a sip of her tea and closed her eyes against the bitterness. It had steeped too long. Still drinkable, though. Like most things in her life lately, she told herself it wasn't personal. People forget. They're distracted. It's not like she ever made a big deal of birthdays anyway. She wasn't that kind of person, never had been. But still, she left the second teacup out. Just in case. At 10:17, the doorbell rang. Eleanor startled, a small involuntary intake of breath, and hurried to the front door, smoothing her sweater like it mattered. Megan stood on the porch holding a white bakery box and a paper bag looped over her arm. Her smile was warm, a little sheepish, her cheeks pink from the November wind. I know you said you didn't want anything, Megan said, stepping in. But you also say that about birthdays and pie crust, and look how wrong you were about both. Eleanor laughed, something unclenching in her chest. You're impossible. Only when necessary, Megan said, setting the box on the kitchen counter. Lemon lavender cake, and I made you a card. Don't open it till I leave. I don't want to watch you get teary-eyed and pretend it's allergies. Eleanor reached out, touched her friend's wrist. Thank you for remembering. Megan poured coffee as if she'd done it 100 times in this kitchen. And she had. They sat at the table, and for a while the morning softened. They laughed about failed recipes, old PTA drama, and the time Megan accidentally texted Eleanor a rant about her ex-husband that was meant for her therapist. The second teacup was finally used. The kitchen warmed with the scent of citrus and sugar. You doing anything tonight? Megan asked carefully, after a lull. Eleanor shook her head. No plans. You could come over. Noah's making chili. I can promise questionable football commentary and a dog that wants to sit in your lap while you eat. I might take you up on that, Eleanor said, meaning it, though her voice gave it a weight it hadn't earned yet. Megan smiled and glanced at the time. I should get going. Don't forget to open the card after I leave. They hugged at the door. Eleanor lingered after it closed, watching her friend's car pull away, the bakery box half empty on the table behind her. She walked back inside, sat, picked up her phone. Still no texts. She opened the card. Her eyes moved across the handwritten words once, then again. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached for the second teacup, still warm, and stared out the window with a new stillness hardening in her ribs. Then the phone buzzed. One single message, from an unknown number. "Happy birthday, Eleanor. You were never supposed to find out." Her fingers went cold around the porcelain. The next morning came gray and unsure, like a bruise spreading across the sky. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, holding the message in her mind like a hot coal she didn't know where to put. It sat unacknowledged in her phone, screen dark, her thumb hovering over it every few hours before she set it down again. No name, no follow-up. Just those 12 words, tight and surgical. She hadn't slept well. She hadn't replied. By mid-morning, she was back at the dining table, the birthday cake box pushed to the side, the card closed but not put away, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose as she sorted a weathered bundle of letters, old ones, tied in a faded red ribbon. They smelled faintly of paper and time. Each envelope bore handwriting she knew instantly, Patrick's rounded loops, Eric's backward-leaning scrawl, letters from when they were young, when they still made construction paper birthday cards and spelled awesome with a missing E. "Mommy, you're the best cook in the galaxy. I love you more than dinosaurs. Thank you for always packing extra Oreos." She smiled at one folded sheet in particular, crayon drawings of her as a superhero in an apron, beams of light shooting from her oven mitts. Her smile cracked a little at the edges. The letters didn't lie. They had loved her once, fiercely, without complication. She hadn't imagined it. That kind of love didn't just dissolve. It had to be scrubbed out, rewritten, replaced with something else. The door creaked open behind her. "You're up early for someone who just turned timeless," Ruth Ann called, stepping into the kitchen with 2 mugs in hand. She was already dressed in her scrubs, hair pinned back tight, her presence always a mix of gentle and no-nonsense. "Barely slept," Eleanor admitted, taking 1 mug. "Your caffeine bribe is noted and accepted." Ruth Ann sat across from her, scanning the table's evidence. Old letters, half-sliced cake, yesterday's card. "They really didn't call," Eleanor shook her head once. Ruth Ann leaned forward, her voice low and careful. "That's 3 years in a row, Ellie." Eleanor looked down at the mug. "I suppose I stopped being on their calendar." She said it lightly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. There was a beat of silence. Just the tick of the wall clock, too loud in the hush between them. "You want me to say something to them?" Ruth Ann asked. "No," Eleanor said quickly. "That would only make it worse. They'd think I'm trying to guilt them into a phone call. I'm not. I'm just noticing," Ruth Ann finished for her. Eleanor nodded. After Ruth Ann left, Eleanor stayed there a long time. The house felt even quieter once the front door shut. She considered rereading the messages again, the ones from years ago that reminded her who she'd been to them once. Instead, she opened the drawer by the side table, pulled out an old photo album, Eric at 9, front tooth missing, his arm thrown over Patrick's shoulder. Patrick at 12, rolling his eyes, but grinning anyway. She let herself sit in the ache. The doorbell rang again just before noon. It was Megan, again, holding a brown bag that smelled like cinnamon and something buttery. "Don't look at me like that," she said, breezing past Eleanor. "These were going to get stale if I left them on the counter another day. And yes, I know what I said yesterday about not fussing, but today doesn't count." "You shouldn't have," Eleanor said, though her tone lacked conviction. Megan pulled out 2 pastries and slid one onto a plate. "Birthdays are small anchors. You don't always know you're drifting until you're too far from shore." Eleanor blinked at her, touched. "Did you read the card?" Megan asked, chewing. Eleanor nodded. "And?" "I didn't cry." "Yet," Megan said, smiling. They ate in silence for a while, comfortable but fragile. Eleanor stared down at the crumbs on her plate, something sharp moving beneath the surface of her calm. "Do you think I was too much of a mother?" she asked suddenly. Megan looked up. "I mean, I poured everything into them. I held nothing back. And now they—" She trailed off. Megan set her coffee down gently. "You didn't do it wrong, Ellie. You just had sons." Eleanor exhaled, half laugh, half sigh. After Megan left, the house closed in again. And then, at 1:32 p.m., Her phone buzzed once more, a voicemail this time. Blocked number. She tapped it, put it on speaker. A man's voice, low, nervous. I didn't know who else to call. It's about Patrick. It's not what you think. Click. Eleanor sat frozen, the phone still in her hand. The room around her suddenly too quiet again. The voicemail sat on her phone like a fresh bruise. Eleanor replayed it twice the next morning, still trying to decide if it was a mistake, or worse, a setup for something else entirely. The voice wasn't familiar, but the fear in it had been real. About Patrick, but vague and unfinished. She didn't call back. There was no number to call. Instead, she made coffee that tasted like nothing and stood staring at the hallway photos. Her boys, so small once, so close to her. And now, at 9:04 a.m., the doorbell rang. Patrick, just there, in her doorway like someone who hadn't evaporated from her life. He looked taller somehow, or maybe just thinner. Navy wool coat, jaw tense. Eyes glancing past her shoulder into the house like he was already halfway out of the moment. "Hi, Mom," he said. No smile. Just business. Eleanor opened the door wider. "Come in." He did, but didn't sit. Just opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a document in a blue folder. She noticed how carefully he avoided eye contact. "There's an insurance policy, old, from when Dad passed. It needs a signature. Something about release of rights for the payout to go through clean. It's routine," he added, like that made it less cold. Eleanor took the folder, scanned the dense legal print, though none of it registered. She saw her name, her signature line, her date of birth, her birthday. He hadn't said it. Hadn't even hesitated. She signed. Patrick clicked his pen closed, like a stopwatch ending a lap. "Thanks," he said, tucking the folder back in his briefcase. "I'll drop it off today." "That voicemail," Eleanor said quietly. "Was it from you?" He blinked. "What voicemail?" "Yesterday. A man called about you. Said it wasn't what I thought." Patrick's face blanked, then rearranged itself into indifference. "Probably a scam. Don't answer those." Eleanor studied him, but his armor was up. She knew that face. Had seen it at 15 when he was caught sneaking out. At 17 when he first learned how to lie smoothly. "You've lost weight," she said gently. "I've been busy." She nodded. "Of course." There was a pause, short but wide enough to carry everything unsaid. "Well, I should get going," Patrick said, already halfway to the door. "Thanks again." He didn't ask how she'd been. Didn't mention the date. He left like a courier, not a son. The silence that followed was meaner than usual. At 4:36 p.m., her phone buzzed again. Eric. Her chest lifted, just a little. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice bright like a text bubble. "Sorry I missed your birthday. Things have been nuts. Work's been nonstop." She smiled because it was reflex, not because it felt good. "That's okay. I'll come by soon, though, I promise." That'd be nice. But soon dropped like dust. It never landed. Never meant a date. She'd heard it for 3 years. It was always soon, never Thursday, never around 7. "I gotta hop into a meeting," Eric added. "But I love you, seriously." "Love you too." Call ended. The house returned to stillness. Later that evening, Ruth Ann came by with a soup container and a soft knock. She didn't stay long, just enough to hug her, press the warm plastic into her hand and say, "You raised adults. That's not the same as companions." Hard truth, I know. Eleanor didn't argue. That night, she opened a clean journal from the hall closet. She flipped past the empty pages until she landed on the third one, just enough distance to make the first entry feel deliberate. She wrote the date. Then, Megan, lemon lavender cake. Megan, cinnamon pastries. Ruth Ann, soup. Megan, card. Megan, birthday anchor. She stared at the ink, her hand resting against the page. Her chest felt tight, but not broken. Not yet. She turned the page. Blank. Waiting. And that's when she saw it. Tucked inside the back of the journal, a single photograph. Not one she remembered placing there. Patrick. Maybe 17. Standing next to a man Eleanor didn't recognize. The photo was faded. Worn along the edges. But what sent her stomach cold was the note written on the back. In handwriting that wasn't hers. "He doesn't know I kept this. If anything happens to me, start with him. No name, just that. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped the photo back over. It wasn't just an old insurance form. 2 days later, the photo still sat on her counter. Untouched, but not ignored. Eleanor had studied it under the kitchen lamp and again in the morning sun. Patrick's posture, half-closed eyes, the easy slouch of a teenager unaware of consequence. The man beside him, mid-30s maybe, with sharp cheekbones and a hollow expression, remained a mystery. The handwriting on the back was brisk, urgent. Familiar, but she couldn't place it. Her heart hadn't settled since. By Thursday morning, she knew she couldn't sit still any longer. She pulled on her coat, grabbed her folder of estate documents, and drove to her lawyer's office, the brick one with the chipped eagle statue by the parking lot. It was the same firm that had handled her husband's will, the same receptionist who still called her Miss Ellie. Though the name no longer fit and hadn't for years, Thomas Killian was waiting in his office, tie askew, glasses low on his nose. He was in his early 60s now, but still had the voice of a man who'd once argued to win. "You look well," he said as she entered. "I'm here about updates," Eleanor replied, not bothering with pleasantries. She sat across from his cluttered desk and slid over the manila envelope with her trust revisions. He flipped through the file, scanning, nodding. "I see we've got the home, the insurance rider, the secondary assets." A pause. Then his eyes lifted. "Do you still want both sons listed equally?" Eleanor looked down at her hands, fingers knotted in her lap. There had been a time when she wouldn't have blinked at that question. When love was still a simple math problem, 2 sons, split it down the middle, fair, clean. Now she had a voicemail from a stranger, a forged calm in Patrick's voice, and a 17-year-old photo from someone who might have been afraid for his life. "I'm still considering," she said, slow and deliberate. Thomas leaned back slightly. "Nothing urgent, of course, but the documents are live once signed. We're obligated to notify all listed parties." "I understand," she paused. "Let's leave it blank for now," Thomas blinked. "Blank? Yes. No beneficiaries." Eleanor folded her hands over the folder. "Not today." He nodded. "You're allowed that." She left the office without speaking to anyone. The sky had bruised again, thick clouds hurrying over the rooftops like they knew something was coming. That night, back home, she sat at the kitchen table with a single candle flickering in the center. The light danced across the surface, warping shadows around the sugar bowl, the stack of unopened mail, the edge of the photo she'd moved back into the journal. The house made soft creaks, like it was remembering things she'd forgotten. Eleanor didn't pour tea, didn't eat, just sat. The quiet held her. She looked toward the far end of the table, where Patrick used to sit during algebra meltdowns, where Eric once built Lego cities that sprawled into the next room. That was a long time ago, but the ghosts were still polite. She whispered to the room, voice barely there, "Who still remembers me without reminders?" The flame guttered in the draft. No answer came, only the silence, only the small sound of the fridge kicking on. And then, a sharp ping from her phone, an email, no subject, no sender listed. But the body of the message was just 2 words. "He knows." Beneath it, an attached image. She clicked it. It was a surveillance screenshot. Black and white. Patrick, standing in a hallway, talking to the man from the photo. Timestamp. 2 weeks ago. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. Not really. The screenshot kept flashing in her mind. Grainy, time-stamped proof of something she wasn't supposed to know. Patrick's shoulders hunched, the other man's face blurred by angle and motion, but it was him, the man from the photo. 17 years had changed him, but not erased him. And Patrick had lied. The next morning, Eleanor left the house with no real plan. She couldn't sit in those walls again, not today. The silence had started to feel dishonest. Her car seemed to find its way to Maple and Rye, the small bakery Megan opened 6 years ago, tucked on the corner between the post office and the florist that always smelled like eucalyptus and dust. The inside was warm, dim with soft bulbs strung like cafe lights. Jazz played low over the speakers, and the air held the promise of butter and brown sugar. Eleanor walked in, her coat still buttoned halfway. Megan looked up from behind the counter, her face brightening with a genuine kind of gladness you can't fake. "You're early," Megan said, pulling a mug from beneath the espresso machine. "That means I get to pick the tea." "Something dangerous, I hope," Eleanor said, her voice dry but gentler than the day before. Megan slid a cup toward her. "Chamomile, wild stuff. Might make you sleepy enough to finally stop spiraling." Eleanor cracked a small smile and took a seat at the corner table, the one that caught the morning sun without inviting the whole room into your business. The chamomile was sweetened lightly, just the way she liked it. Megan always remembered. They talked about books, ones neither of them finished, ones they meant to reread, about music, how Eleanor couldn't hear Bonnie Raitt without thinking of late summer, about parents, how grief lingers not in sobs but in small inconveniences, about the weather, the way people always do when what they really mean is, "Please stay with me a little longer." By noon, a second tea had arrived without being asked. "On the house," Megan said. "Non-negotiable." Eleanor nodded. She didn't fight it. Over the next few days, it became a rhythm. Morning walks that ended at Maple and Rye, Megan sliding her a muffin before she asked, Eleanor refolding the napkin bin when she thought Megan wasn't looking. Quiet comfort exchanged in glances, not declarations. Thursday, Ruth Ann popped in for a quick coffee and spotted them. "Oh Lord, you've adopted her," Ruth Ann teased, nudging Megan with her elbow. "Or maybe she adopted me," Eleanor replied, without missing a beat. The words surprised her even as she said them, not because they weren't true, but because they felt real, settled, like something old inside her had finally shifted. Megan just laughed and tossed a dish towel at Ruth Ann, who pretended to duck. The rest of the morning passed like an exhale. It wasn't loud or life-changing, but it was honest. There were no roles to perform, no expectations to dodge, no history to dance around. Just cinnamon on the air and the hum of a coffee grinder and someone who remembered how she took her tea. Kindness without strings. That evening, Eleanor drove home with a small brown bag on the passenger seat. A honey scone Megan had insisted she take for tomorrow, but she already knew she'd eat it tonight. That was fine. Tomorrow would take care of itself. Back at the house, she placed the bag gently on the kitchen counter next to the candle and the journal. She stood there a moment, reluctant to re-enter the quiet. Then she turned the photo over one more time. The handwriting on the back, it still tugged at something old and raw inside her. She couldn't let it go. On impulse, she took a fresh page from her journal and wrote the words exactly as they appeared. "He doesn't know I kept this. If anything happens to me, start with him." Then beneath it, in her own handwriting, who was he? She stared at the question, then flipped back to her first page, the kindness log. The list was longer now, but Megan's name still showed up the most. Suddenly, a new message notification slid across her lock screen. Blocked number. "You shouldn't have changed the beneficiary." The message stayed on her phone like a bruise she couldn't press without wincing. "You shouldn't have changed the beneficiary." She hadn't told anyone about the revisions. Not Ruth Ann, not Megan, certainly not Patrick. So how? No. She didn't finish the thought. She deleted it, but that didn't erase the knowing chill that followed. By late afternoon, the phone rang again. Patrick. For a brief, foolish moment, Eleanor hoped he'd call to explain, to check in, to sound like the boy who once scribbled "Love you mostest" on every card. "Mom," he said. His voice clipped. "You didn't sign the final trust packet Thomas sent over." Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her hand resting against the closed journal. "I decided to hold off." A beat of silence. She could almost hear him recalibrating. "It's just temporary paperwork," Patrick said. "A formality. It'll make transferring things cleaner if—" "If what?" she asked softly. He sighed. "If I need to move funds around, it's all short term. You'll still have everything." "That's not what Thomas said." His tone tightened. "You spoke to him?" "Yes." Another pause. This one longer. The kind that starts as control and ends as irritation. "Mom," Patrick said finally, voice cooling to something unfamiliar. "After everything I've done for you, the errands, the appointments, managing Dad's accounts, you can't seriously think I'd take advantage of you." "I don't think that," she said quietly. "But I also don't have to rush to sign something I don't understand." It's not about understanding, he snapped. It's about trust. She closed her eyes, steadying herself. Trust and signatures aren't the same thing, Patrick. Silence again, then sharper. You know what? Do what you want. Just remember who's been keeping things together all these years. Before she could answer, the line clicked dead. Eleanor sat there for several long minutes, the phone still in her hand, until the screen dimmed to black. Her heart felt like it was beating through water. By the time the doorbell rang, the daylight had drained to gray. Megan stood there, scarf loose around her neck, her expression open but careful. Hey. I was heading to the harbor. Thought you might want air. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Yes, please. They walked side by side, their breath visible in the November chill. The harbor lights flickered across the water like scattered coins. The air smelled faintly of salt and engine oil. Megan talked about small things, how the bakery's new oven burned the first batch of croissants, how a regular named Mrs. Caldwell tipped in origami dollars. Eleanor listened, grateful for the noise, for the normalcy. Something's heavy, Megan said finally, eyes on the horizon. You don't have to tell me what. Eleanor smiled faintly. That obvious. Only to people who care. They reached the edge of the dock. The water lapped below, slow and steady. I've realized, Eleanor said after a while, that I feel lighter around people who expect nothing from me. Megan didn't respond with words. She just slipped her hand briefly over Eleanor's arm, a small grounding gesture, then let go. For the first time all day, Eleanor exhaled fully. The air came out in one clean stream, like something uncoiling in her chest. The harbor was quiet, peaceful. For a moment, she could almost forget the email, the call, the way her son's voice had turned to ice. Almost. Then her phone buzzed again in her coat pocket. She didn't want to look, didn't want to give it power, but instinct won. New voicemail, blocked number. She pressed play. A voice she didn't recognize whispered, low and urgent. If he asks again, don't sign anything. He's not who you think he is. Then static. Then silence. Megan turned toward her. You okay? Eleanor slipped the phone back into her pocket, the weight of it burning through the fabric. Yeah, she said softly. Just thinking about tomorrow. The call came mid-morning, casual and clipped. Eric, at least, had the good sense to sound like he was checking in. Hey, Mom. Quick thing. I was going over some old paperwork and found the Cointech stock. You remember that one, right? From when Dad invested back in the day? Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, rubbing the edge of her coffee mug. The windows were streaked with a soft drizzle, the sky that hollow kind of gray that made everything feel thin. Yes, she said. It's still co-titled, he went on. Joint between you and me. There's a buyer, some firm out of Austin, and they're offering above valuation. But they need clean signatures. I was hoping I could just send the docs over for you to sign. He was already speaking like it was done, like she'd said yes. What happens after it sells? Eleanor asked. Eric chuckled lightly. I pay off a few things, reallocate some stuff, but nothing wild. I'll send you your half once it clears. It's not a huge amount, just old weight. Eleanor stared at the steam rising from her mug. Send it. You're the best, Mom. Seriously, I'll get it over this afternoon. The line went dead in seconds. No, how are you? No, how was your birthday? No, I miss you. She signed the document later that afternoon, slowly, her hand cold despite the sweater sleeves pulled over her palms. When the PDF uploaded and the little green checkmark blinked on the screen, she just stared at it. Nothing about it felt closed. She closed her laptop as if it were something fragile. Her eyes were wet, though she hadn't meant them to be. You can't teach memory to people who refuse to look back, Ruth Ann said gently that evening, standing by the sink and drying dishes that didn't need drying. They don't even know what they've lost. Eleanor didn't respond. She just kept wiping the counter in soft circles, like if she kept her hands moving, she wouldn't feel the small cracking in her ribs. The doorbell rang just before dusk. When she opened it, Megan was standing there with a brown paper-wrapped bundle in her arms. Her hair was wind-tousled, her cheeks pink. For you, she said, handing it over without fanfare. Inside, tulips, pale yellow with a single streak of crimson through the center of each petal. Early for the season. Gorgeous. No occasion, Megan added. They reminded me of the ones you grew near the fence. Thought you might want some color. Eleanor blinked down at the flowers. She hadn't even realized she needed something soft until it was in her hands. They're beautiful, she said quietly. I figured your week was loud. Eleanor gave her a long, grateful look. It's been something, Megan nodded. Knowing when not to ask, Eleanor placed the bouquet in water after she left, trimming the stems with care, arranging them in the old blue vase she usually reserved for guests. The sight of them on the kitchen table, gentle, unnecessary, given in kindness alone, felt like someone had thrown a rope to her across the water. The tulips didn't fix anything, but they reminded her of what wasn't broken. Later that night, she checked her email. No follow-up from Eric. She clicked on the stock transfer again, half expecting to see something different in the metadata, but the file was clean, sanitized. She opened her journal instead and wrote under today's date, Megan, tulips, Ruth Ann, dish duty. Eric, vanished. Again. She closed the book softly. Just before bed, she walked past the front door and paused. Another envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just like before, she opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a copy of the stock transfer she'd signed, and underneath it, scribbled in red ink, this time, he did take something. Eleanor woke to sunlight she didn't quite trust. It streamed through the kitchen window like forgiveness, too clean, too soft for what the week had been. The tulips Megan had brought were already opening, leaning toward the light with unearned optimism. She stared at them for a long time, one hand around her coffee, the other resting on the unopened manila envelope that had arrived from Thomas. Inside were the updated trust papers, the ones she hadn't signed before, the ones Patrick had called about, the ones Eric wouldn't even remember existed. The red-inked message from the night before, this time, he did take something, was still lodged in her mind like a splinter. She didn't know if it was warning or manipulation anymore. She just knew it was enough. Eleanor took out her pen. On the last page, the words primary beneficiary stared back at her, blank and waiting. Her hand didn't shake, not this time. Megan Rowe. She wrote it cleanly, each letter deliberate, steady. She didn't stop to wonder what anyone would think. For once, there was no internal debate, no justification, no imagined arguments, no guilt. Just the quiet certainty that this kindness, this friendship, was the only inheritance that still had weight. She signed her name at the bottom, slid the papers into the return envelope, and sealed it before she could second-guess herself. Thomas's office smelled faintly of old books and printer ink. He greeted her with his usual calm professionalism, glasses perched low, voice smooth as worn leather. Everything looks in order, he said, flipping through the pages. Then his gaze paused, just briefly, at the new line. Megan Rowe, he read aloud. He looked up at her, one eyebrow lifting. Not family, Eleanor met his eyes. Not by blood. He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. It's unusual, he admitted, but not wrong. It's honest. She felt something loosen inside her chest. Honest. That word fit. I just don't want the house sold, she said. She'll understand that. She keeps the garden, that's all I ask. I'll note the condition, he said, jotting a line in the margin. When she left, the early afternoon light made the whole street shimmer faintly, the asphalt still wet from a morning drizzle. She rolled down her car window halfway and just sat there for a while, breathing. The simple relief of having done it, the finality, the stillness after decision, felt cleaner than anything she'd felt in years. It wasn't revenge, it was release. That evening, Ruth Ann came by with a grocery bag and her usual unannounced affection. Eleanor poured them both tea as Ruth Ann unpacked apples and oat bread. So, Ruth Ann said, leaning on the counter, you look calm, which means you either finally told off a telemarketer or you did something serious. Eleanor smiled. I changed the will. Ruth Ann froze mid-slice. To who? To someone who remembers me. The knife clinked softly against the cutting board. Megan? Eleanor nodded. Ruth Ann's expression didn't shift, just deepened. Good. Blood isn't the only inheritance, Ellie. Sometimes you leave things where they'll be loved, not just owned. Eleanor exhaled, a laugh breaking through. That's exactly it. Ruth Ann reached over, squeezed her hand. It's about time you did something for yourself that didn't have to make sense to anyone else. They ate quietly after that. Ordinary peace. It felt earned. Later, after Ruth Ann left, Eleanor stood at the back door watching dusk pull itself over the garden. The soil was dark and wet, the tulip stems in the vase glowing faintly in the low light. She could already imagine Megan tending to them one day, the same gentle patience she showed with pastries, now turned toward the earth. The thought didn't hurt, it healed. She turned off the lights, ready for bed, when something flickered on her laptop screen from across the room. A notification, new email, no subject. She clicked it open, a single sentence. No greeting, no signature. She's in danger now, called to. Then the message vanished, auto-deleted before she could screenshot or reply. Eleanor stared at the blank screen, her pulse hammering once, twice. She looked toward the window. The tulip swayed slightly, though the air was still. Patrick didn't call first. He just showed up, mid-morning, buttoned blazer, pressed collar, a smile that looked hand-painted and hollow. In one hand, he carried a leather folder. In the other, a set of glossy real estate brochures fanned out like a magician's deck. "Mom," he said, stepping over the threshold without waiting for an invitation. "You look good. Healthier." The implication slid between the words. "Better than you should, considering." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You're early or late? Depends on how you count time." Patrick chuckled, crisp and practiced. "I was in the area. Figured I'd stop in and talk options." "Options?" she asked. "For the house," he said, easing himself into the kitchen chair across from hers, like he owned the legs beneath it. "It's a great time to sell. The market's nuts right now. Low inventory, high demand. You'd get way above appraisal." He laid the brochures on the table one by one. Upscale condos, senior community cottages, luxury rentals with low-maintenance lifestyle, in bold. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not looking to move," she said. "I'm not saying today," Patrick replied smoothly, "but it doesn't hurt to think ahead. Downsize, free up some liquidity. You could travel or just simplify." "I like this house," she said. He leaned forward. "Mom, you've got more square footage than you need. And you shouldn't be doing yard work at your age." She smiled faintly. "I don't. The garden tends to me more than the other way around." The kettle began to whistle, a low, mournful sound that rose like an alarm. Eleanor stood and moved to it calmly, lifting it off the burner. "Tea?" she asked. Patrick nodded, flipping one of the brochures toward her. "Check page 5. Gated community, 24-hour concierge." She poured the tea, didn't look at the page. At that moment, the front door creaked open. Megan's voice called lightly, "Knock, knock. Brought you some leftovers from the shop before I forgot again." She appeared in the doorway, holding a bakery box tied with string, her hair pulled into a loose bun, a dusting of flour still on her sweater. Patrick's eyes lifted from the brochure. He took her in like he was cataloging a piece of furniture. Eleanor saw it. Megan smiled politely. "Didn't realize you had company." "This is my son, Patrick," Eleanor said evenly. Patrick stood, his smile widening. "Ah, so you're the one with the muffins." Megan held out the box. "And cookies today." "Appreciated," Patrick said, not taking the box. "She keeps talking about the bakery. Must be a comfort, having help around." Megan's eyes didn't flinch, but Eleanor saw the shift in her shoulders. She stepped forward and took the box herself. "Thank you, Megan. These look beautiful." Megan nodded once, her voice calm. "Glad you like them. I'll let you two catch up." She left quickly but without rush, the door shutting behind her with the soft finality of a line being drawn. Patrick sat again, sipping his tea without comment. "Nice of her to pop in. You've always been a magnet for strays." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. When he left 20 minutes later, brochures still fanned across the table. He paused at the doorway. "Just think about it," he said. "No pressure, just options." Eleanor smiled at him, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I always think," she said. "That's the difference between us." She closed the door behind him, not hard, but not soft either. Megan was still at the end of the walk, fumbling with her keys. Eleanor crossed the porch quietly. "I'm sorry," she said, for his tone. Megan looked up. He was careful with it, like it was sharp and he didn't want to get any on himself. Eleanor gave a small laugh. It surprised her. He thinks the house is too much for me, she said. That I should simplify. Megan raised an eyebrow. Does he want to help you pack, or does he just want the property? I think he wants the last word, Eleanor said. They stood in the quiet for a moment. I'll keep bringing muffins, Megan said, just to complicate his plan. Eleanor smiled again, but her stomach churned. Because underneath the lightness, something had changed. Patrick had looked at Megan like a variable, a liability. And if someone had really sent that last message, she's in danger now too, then this wasn't just tension anymore. It was warning. That night, Eleanor set the alarm on every door and window, and placed the tulip vase beside her nightstand, just in case she needed to remember what safety looked like. The next morning, the house felt like it was waiting for something to happen. Eleanor wasn't. She moved through it quietly, made tea, fed the neighbor's cat through the window screen, the way she always did, and then went to the study. The air inside was cooler, the scent of cedar faint but steady. It was where she'd boxed up her husband's things years ago, a compromise between keeping and letting go. She pulled down the worn leather box marked RS letters. The edges were frayed, the lid slightly warped from time. Inside were old envelopes tied with a strip of navy ribbon. His handwriting, steady, clean, a little romantic even when he was talking about plumbing repairs, looked like an artifact from another life. She unfolded one carefully. The paper had yellowed, soft as fabric. A letter from 1986, the year before Patrick was born. His words, familiar yet new again. Ellie, if the years change our faces, let them not change our kindness. Our love will outlive recognition. It has to. Otherwise, what's the point of remembering anything at all? R. She sat there for a long time, thumb running over the fading ink. The ache was sharp but clean, not the kind that destroyed, but the kind that clarified. By the time she refolded the letter, an idea had begun to form. Something simple, something he would have understood. A scholarship, not for prestige, not to impress anyone, just a small memorial in both their names, for students in town who had no one to help them through college applications or fees. A quiet bridge for the forgotten ones. She called the community foundation that afternoon. 2 weeks later, the bakery smelled like sugar, butter, and printer ink. Megan was perched at the front counter with her laptop, designing the flyer. The Robert and Eleanor Sinclair Memorial Fund, a small start for big dreams. Too sentimental? Megan asked, turning the screen toward her. It's perfect, Eleanor said, smiling. Megan grinned. I'll bake for the fundraiser. People will pay extra if it's for something sweet and sad. Eleanor laughed, a full sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. I'll hold you to that. Ruth Ann helped with logistics, as she always did. Chasing signatures, booking the community hall, convincing the local paper to print a short blurb. The day of the event arrived with that nervous hum only small towns know. Folding chairs, paper streamers, the faint scent of vanilla and floor wax. People came, neighbors she hadn't seen in years, former students she'd tutored. Megan with a table of pastries that vanished within an hour. Eleanor stood near the display table, photographs of her husband in uniform, a framed copy of that letter under glass. She'd invited her sons too. Sent the messages weeks ago. Neither replied. Neither showed. Ruth Ann found her halfway through the evening, clutching a clipboard like a weapon against emotion. You did it, she said. Barely, Eleanor answered. I half expected an empty room. Ruth Ann shook her head. You built a family from whoever showed up. That's the real inheritance. Eleanor blinked hard, swallowing something that wanted to be tears. Around them, the chatter filled the hall. Clinking cups, laughter, the quiet warmth of human gravity pulling toward good. When the last form was signed and the total tallied, the foundation rep smiled. You didn't just meet your goal, he said. You doubled it. Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest, surprised by the sharpness of the joy. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. Later that night, she returned home to the quiet cottage. The tulips had faded now, their stems bending like bowing heads. She set the framed letter beside them. She poured herself a single glass of red wine and carried it to the porch. The air was cool, the moon thin and high. She thought about Robert, his letters, his steadiness, and the people who had shown up when others hadn't. Megan's laughter, Ruth Ann's dry affection, the town's simple kindness. The doorbell rang. She froze. No headlights outside, no car in the drive. Her heart beat once, hard. She set down the glass, moved toward the door, and called out softly, "Who's there?" No answer, just an envelope sliding under the door, no stamp, no name. Inside, a single printed photo, Patrick, standing beside her husband's grave, smiling. The next morning, the photo stayed on the table like a challenge. Patrick, standing at Robert's grave, smiling. It wasn't the grin of mourning or remembrance. It was colder than that, vacant and camera-aware, like he knew someone would be watching. Eleanor didn't touch the envelope. She simply turned the photo over, blank on the back, nothing to trace. No fingerprints to lift. Just that look. By noon, she was back at Maple and Rye, the warmth of the bakery a small mercy against the gnawing sense that someone was closing in. Megan was sweeping the floor behind the front counter, humming off key, flour dust catching in the light like snow that didn't know how to fall. There were no customers yet. The bell hadn't chimed all morning. Eleanor sat at her usual table, her hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile. Her phone buzzed against the wood. Eric, she hesitated, then answered. "Hey, Mom," he said, brisk, businesslike. "Quick favor, shouldn't take more than a minute." She braced. "Okay. So I'm restructuring a few things on my taxes, and one of the investment forms still lists you as a legacy shareholder. The firm says we can push it through faster if you co-sign a temporary designation. Just a formality." A beat passed. Eleanor looked down at the steam rising from her tea, steady and soft. "I'm not comfortable with that," she said. Silence. "Why not?" Eric asked. "I have new obligations," she replied calmly. "Ones that require me to be cautious." He didn't speak for several seconds. She could hear the low hum of his Bluetooth connection, the faint clicking of his keyboard. "Wow," he said at last. "That's new." "I know," she said. More silence. Then, "You know I'm not trying to screw you over, right?" Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't need to. The question wasn't about her. It was about him, and whether he still believed she'd always say yes just to keep peace. "I'll figure it out," Eric said flatly. No goodbye, just the sound of the call ending. Eleanor set the phone down gently and stared at the blank screen. No sting this time, just quiet. A moment later, she stood and walked to the counter, where Megan was still sweeping flour into the long-handled pan. "You've remembered every year," Eleanor said, her voice soft. "My birthday. My husband's. You even brought cake for my dog's adoption anniversary, and I didn't even like that dog." Megan looked up, a wry smile curling at the corners of her mouth. "That dog was an asshole," Eleanor laughed. Megan leaned the broom against the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. It's easy to remember the people who made a difference. The bakery smelled like cinnamon and rising dough. It was too warm for anything to bloom inside Eleanor's chest, but something did anyway. The bell over the door rang, and a customer stepped in, breaking the moment. Megan returned to her place behind the counter. Eleanor returned to her table. Her phone buzzed again, this time a blocked number. No message, just a silent call. She let it ring out, then turned the phone off completely and slipped it into her bag. Outside, the sky had gone flat with approaching weather. She finished her tea, took one last look at the closed photo envelope she'd slipped into her coat pocket that morning, and made a decision. She needed answers, not protection. That evening, she would go to the courthouse, not to file anything, to pull old records, starting with the man from the photo. The courthouse had smelled of dust and lemon oil. Eleanor had spent the morning there, her name echoing softly across the marble corridor as a clerk led her through a maze of file drawers and digital records. She'd found what she came for, confirmation that the man in the photo had once worked with Robert decades ago on a land trust deal tied to Patrick's first internship. It wasn't proof of anything yet, but it was enough to shift the weight of suspicion. By the time she left, her mind was clearer than it had been in months. Now, late afternoon sunlight pooled across Thomas Killian's desk, turning the ink on the papers to dark honey. The old lawyer adjusted his glasses and slid the final document toward her. "This is the last piece," he said quietly. "Once you sign, it'll stand. The home, the account, the small trust, all in her name. The rest handled through the foundation, as requested." Eleanor nodded. "And it stays sealed until after I'm gone." "Exactly." He gave her a faint smile. "Your instructions are clear." Ruth Ann stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, the other holding the witness pen. She had insisted on coming, not because Eleanor needed help, but because she deserved someone in the room who didn't want anything from her. Eleanor glanced at the blank signature line. The pen felt heavy in her hand. "I'm not punishing them," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone. "I'm just remembering who remembered me." Ruth Ann squeezed her shoulder once. "You don't owe anyone an apology for gratitude." Eleanor signed. The sound of the pen gliding across paper was small, almost tender, a heartbeat's length of permanence. Thomas turned the document toward himself, initialed the bottom corner, then slid it into a manila envelope marked "Confidential Delivery upon passing." "I'll see it handled quietly," he said. "Exactly as you asked." Eleanor nodded again. Her movements were measured, calm. She reached into her bag and withdrew a separate envelope, handwritten, sealed in cream paper. The script across the front read, "To my sons." She placed it on the desk beside the legal folder. "That one you deliver with the rest." Thomas glanced at it, then met her eyes. "Understood." The letter weighed less than a page, but it carried everything she hadn't said aloud: love without illusion, memory without permission, and the single truth she wanted them to face. "I stopped waiting for you to come home, so I made one instead." Back at the cottage, the air smelled faintly of rain and mint from the garden. Ruth Ann brewed tea while Eleanor sat by the window, watching the last of the sun melt gold across the yard. The tulips were almost gone now, their petals curling inward, but they still caught light in a way that made them look alive. Ruth Ann poured 2 cups and handed her one. "You okay?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Yes. For once, I think I am." They sat in silence, the kind that feels like understanding. Outside, the wind shifted. The garden swayed. A bird dipped through the fence line and vanished into the woods. Eleanor lifted her cup, let the warmth steady her hands. "This isn't about leaving something behind," she said. "It's about leaving it where it'll be cared for." Ruth Ann nodded. "You did that." They sipped their tea as the sunlight drained into amber. For a rare moment, peace held. Then, a small sound from the kitchen. The faint buzz of her phone, though she was sure she'd left it turned off. Eleanor set her cup down slowly. She crossed the room, the floorboards groaning beneath her feet. The phone lay on the counter, screen dim, then it lit up once, pulsing blue. New voicemail, no caller ID. She didn't press play. She just stared at it. That single blinking light reflected in the glass of the window behind her, right next to her own reflection. And behind that, the faintest suggestion of movement in the garden. Something or someone standing near the fence line, watching. The invitation was Eleanor's idea, but only because she knew exactly what not to expect. She kept it short, a simple text to each of them: "Dinner, Sunday, if you're around." She didn't follow up, she didn't explain, and surprisingly, they both replied, "Sure, I'll swing by." That was it. Sunday arrived with an unseasonable chill in the air and the dull metallic light of a sky that couldn't make up its mind. Eleanor set the table with mismatched cloth napkins, her best white plates, and silverware she hadn't used in years. She didn't light candles. No need for performance. By 6:30, both Patrick and Eric were standing in her kitchen, jackets half-zipped, voices overlapping as they talked about traffic, airport parking, crypto trends, and a podcast neither of them could remember the name of. They hadn't brought wine, or flowers, or anything. Patrick kept glancing at his phone between bites. Eric checked his watch more than once. Still, Eleanor smiled. She poured them both iced tea and served the lasagna she'd made from the old family recipe card, the one they used to request for birthdays. Neither of them mentioned it. They ate quickly, spoke faster, and answered her questions with enough enthusiasm to pass for politeness. "How's work? Crazy? You seeing anyone?" "Not seriously." You sleeping enough? Define enough. When the meal ended, they lingered near the door, offering vague plans and vaguer hugs. We should do this more. Yeah, totally. This was nice. Next time at my place. They were gone before the porch light finished flickering on. Ruth Ann came by 20 minutes later, like she'd been waiting just down the street. Well, she asked, eyeing the still warm plates in the sink. Eleanor was wiping the table slowly, her expression unreadable. They showed up, you said. Ruth Ann snorted. Out of guilt, probably. That's still showing up, Eleanor said, her voice quiet, not bitter, just resigned. Some people don't even do that. She poured them each a glass of wine, and the two of them sat in the dim kitchen light, the kind that made everything feel like it had already happened. They didn't ask about the house, Ruth Ann noted. No, Eleanor said. They didn't mention the scholarship either. No, Ruth Ann paused. Did you tell them? Eleanor shook her head. There was nothing to say that wouldn't turn into something else. They sat in silence, the soft tick of the wall clock marking each second that passed without need. Still, Ruth Ann said, you did good lasagna. Eleanor smiled. Thank God for bechamel. Later that night, Eleanor walked through the quiet house, shutting off lights, checking windows. She paused by the front door, listening. No wind, no movement. She stepped out onto the porch. The sky was clouded over, the garden still. Even the tulips had surrendered, petals folded in like closing hands. Then, just as she turned to go back inside, she spotted it. Not on the porch this time. On the seat of her garden bench, perfectly placed. Another envelope. She picked it up with a sigh, fingers already cold. Inside, a single sheet of paper. This one typed. Too late to reverse course, but not too late to warn her. Tell Megan, he's already close. Eleanor looked up sharply, her eyes scanning the tree line. Nothing. But somewhere out there, someone knew. And someone was keeping score. The next morning, Eleanor didn't mention the letter. Not to Ruth Ann, not to Megan. She folded it, slid it into the back of her journal, and left it there, like a splinter you learn to walk with. It would be dealt with soon, but not today. Today was quiet. Crisp and overcast. The air smelled like coffee grounds and morning rain. Eleanor walked to Maple and Rye, a little slower than usual, noticing how the neighborhood had begun to turn. The trees still holding tight to late autumn red, sidewalks soft with curled leaves. Inside, the bakery glowed warm, as if nothing out there could touch it. The bell over the door chimed, and Megan looked up from the counter with that same steady, bright-eyed smile. You made it, she said. I always do, Eleanor replied. There were a few customers scattered at the tables, a couple with laptops, a man reading a paperback, a toddler eating half a croissant. No one she recognized, but no one she needed to. She took her usual seat by the window. A moment later, Megan appeared with a mug of tea and something small tucked behind her back. Today's chamomile, she said, placing the mug down. And one more thing. She reached around and set it on the table, a cake, just big enough for 3 forks, frosted with whipped cream and scattered with thin lemon slices, 3 candles already lit. Eleanor blinked. What is this? Megan shrugged. It's your birthday. Eleanor hesitated. It's not for another 2 days. I know, Megan said, but I made this one today, while I still had time. The bakery quieted a little as Megan waved Ruth Ann over from the back, and the two of them stood on either side of the table. Ruth Ann grinned. Megan smoothed her apron, and softly, not perfectly, they began to sing. Happy birthday to you. The toddler in the corner clapped along. Someone behind the counter hummed in harmony. The candles flickered. Eleanor sat still, her hand on the warm mug, her chest too tight to speak. Not from sadness, from the weight of being seen. When the song ended, Ruth Ann said, Make a wish, or don't. You've earned both. Eleanor leaned forward and blew out the candles. The scent of lemon rose like a memory. Megan hugged her first, fast and tight. You're part of the recipe here, she whispered. You know that, right? Eleanor nodded. Her throat burned. I'm beginning to. Ruth Ann leaned in, kissed her hair. You did it, she said softly. You found home again. It wasn't loud, It wasn't grand. There were no gifts, no streamers, just cake and tea and warmth and presents, and not a single thing expected in return. Later, as the bakery emptied and the cake was down to its last sliver, Eleanor sat back and looked around the room. The light, the laughter, the clatter of dishes behind the counter. The way Megan moved, precise, kind, without trying to impress. This was what remembering looked like. Not legacy, not obligation, presence. That night, Eleanor returned to her cottage. Still wearing the soft echo of the day like a shawl around her shoulders, she lit a candle, opened a window, let the air in. She thought about telling Megan about the letter, about the man near the fence line, about how close it all felt now. But not tonight. Tonight, the house smelled like lemon cake and warmth. Then, just before bed, the doorbell rang once. No one was there, just a thumb drive. Left on the top step. Eleanor bent down, picked it up, and turned it in her fingers. There was a label taped to one side. It read, "If you want the truth, press play. Just don't expect to like it." Eleanor woke before dawn, the air thin and blue around the edges of the curtains. The candle on her nightstand had burned itself out in a small pool of wax, the smoke still faint in the room. The thumb drive sat where she'd left it on the dresser. She hadn't pressed play. Maybe she never would. Whatever truth it held, it no longer belonged to the part of her that needed peace. She dressed slowly, cream sweater, soft jeans, hair pulled back the way Robert used to like. Then she sat at her desk, the one by the window overlooking the garden. The early light had a kind of mercy to it, making everything look gentler than it was. She pulled out a sheet of stationery, the same set she'd kept for years, waiting for an occasion that never came. At the top she wrote, "To my sons." The words came easily this time. "You were loved beyond memory. I just grew tired of reminding you. That isn't bitterness, it's exhaustion. You both became men in the world, and I became invisible inside it. I don't blame you for growing away from me. I only wish you'd noticed when I stopped reaching. Still, love doesn't vanish. It changes its address. Wherever you are, I hope you feel some trace of it. The same way I feel your absence, in the quiet, in the empty chair at the table, in the birthdays that went unspoken. You will always have my prayers. You just no longer have my waiting." She signed her name in careful, steady script. Eleanor folded the letter once, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it in the top drawer of her desk, right beside the photograph of the three of them on the beach. Patrick on her shoulders, Eric clutching her hand, both of them squinting at the sun. She could still remember the smell of sunscreen and salt water, the sound of Robert laughing behind the camera. She didn't feel anger, not anymore, just the quiet certainty that life keeps moving even when people don't notice who's keeping pace beside them. The next morning broke mild and silver, the sky brushed with cloud. Eleanor stepped outside with her gloves and pruning shears. The garden met her with the familiar smell of wet soil and mint. She knelt among the tulips, trimming the spent blooms, clearing space for what would come next. She heard the soft tap of shoes on the sidewalk and looked up. Megan was walking past, coat pulled close against the breeze, a paper bag of pastries in her arms. "Morning," she called. "Morning," Eleanor answered, waving. "Save one of those for me." "Only if you promise to come by later," Megan said. Eleanor smiled. "I always do." Megan waved once more and continued down the street, her shape blurring slightly in the mist that lingered between houses. Eleanor stood there a moment longer, looking over her garden, the rows uneven but honest. The soil dark with promise. The world keeps what we nurture, she thought. It always has. She went back inside and opened her journal, the one filled with months of names and kindnesses. She flipped to a fresh page. At the top she wrote the date. Then her final line, "Remembering is a form of love." She closed the book and placed it beside the letter in the drawer. Outside, the wind caught the last of the tulip petals, lifting them into the air like pale confetti. That evening, when the sky turned to amber and the garden hummed with crickets, Eleanor sat on the porch with a cup of tea cooling beside her. Her house, her home, felt quiet, but not empty. The kind of quiet that listens back. She looked toward the path where Megan had walked earlier, where Ruth Ann's car sometimes pulled up unannounced. where her husband's laughter still seemed to echo on certain afternoons when the light hit just right. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the strange, startling peace of a life reclaimed. Then she spoke into the dusk, half prayer, half confession. My sons forgot my birthday for the third time, so I gave my estate to the one person who never forgot me. The evening held the words without judgment, carrying them somewhere safe, and in the fading light, Eleanor smiled.